And maybe you do. Maybe you do. I know many people do. If you're not sure if your life is full of meaning, I know the secret. I know how to know for certain if you're living a life full of meaning. I know how you can live confident about that. In fact, my ultimate objective today, as we go through this teaching, where we're aiming, where we're heading towards, is an invitation. An invitation to live in such a way that is saturated with significance. A life meaning-filled. Filled with meaning. Now, we have a study to go through to set this all up, but all this study is doing is setting up an invitation, setting up a direction of how you, in whatever your context and whatever your situation, can know for certain that you are living a life that is significant as you live for Jesus and His kingdom. Now, I know what I'm talking about. My wife, who knows me more than any other human being, she tells me, Brian, you don't struggle with this, and yet so many of us do, and I understand, but you don't need to struggle with this. Well, you just need to make sure you're about the Jesus stuff. All right, but we'll get there. We'll get there. We're going to dive in today. We're in a study of Hebrews, which is, like I said, basically, no, we're not there yet. We're in a study of Hebrews, which is basically a huge study about how amazing Jesus is. The crisis behind the book of Hebrews is simply this. You have a church who at one time was excited about the gospel, was bold about the gospel. You know how it is when you're excited about something, you talk about it. When you're excited about something, you don't care what other people think, then you just go for it and you just proclaim it and you just exude enthusiasm about it and you champion this thing. Well, that's what these people were like years ago. But then they experienced rejection and being pushed back, and ultimately their passion for Jesus had waned. They were once so zealous in saying, you can be rescued out of darkness and brought into the kingdom of light. And this message irritated everyone. It irritated the religious people, because the religious people wanted nothing to do with Jesus, or at least they were insulted by this message that you needed more than just being good, or doing the religious thing, going to synagogue, or going to the doing. Yeah. Now we know that, right? I don't want to brush too quickly past that. We understand that you need Jesus. That being religious and church attending and being a good person is not. It's great, but it's not. You need more. You need Jesus, and so the early church was proclaiming this message, and the religious people were irritated, and now that passion has died off. And now the people of that generation, or at least that city and that town where the author's writing to, they've let their passion wane, and some of them have even stopped going to church. So the plan of the book of Hebrews is to reawaken. And how do you reawaken souls that have kind of gone towards apathy? Well, you remind them of how great Jesus is. You remind them all these different ways about how great their salvation is, and you warn them the dangers of falling away, but ultimately you look and you celebrate Jesus and all the aspects of salvation that are pertinent to awakening the people in this time. And so that's what our study is like as we go through this book. It's an awakening study. It's a look at Jesus study. It's to remember all the great things about our salvation. We started off, there's 5 main sections in this book. Section 1 was about how Jesus is better than the angels, and we talked about that section. We talked about Jesus is better than Moses, and we talked about that section. Well, today we come to Jesus is better than the priests, than the religious leaders. You've seen Jesus compared to the supernatural beings. You've seen him compared to the national leaders. The best one that they ever had, Moses, and now we're talking about how Jesus is better than their religious leaders, the priests. Now, because this section on priests goes on for several chapters, we're not going to read all the sections. Instead, we're just going to touch on a few just to kind of reinforce what I'm going to be summarizing about this message, that Jesus is our great high priest. But before we go all the way into that, I want to remind you that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's 3 different levels of priests. There's the normal priests. all right? The normal priest, spectacular. I think you remember when God's people escape from Egypt, they get to Mount Sinai. Moses goes up to receive the 10 Commandments. And then the people build a golden calf, and they build an idol, and they start worshiping this false god. And so Moses comes down. He's angry, breaks the commandments. No, he doesn't break the commandments. He breaks the stone, 10 Commandments. I don't have, well, I wasn't saying, whoa, we'll edit that later. Anyway, so he shatters the stone tablets, and then the Levites strap on their swords, and they go and they stop the idol worship. They stop the worship of the golden calf, and then the Levites are set apart as the priests for God's people. It's a special event, and basically the Levite priests, the normal priests, do all sorts of stuff in service of the high priest. So they carry stuff around, they transport things, they have different tasks assigned to them in different eras. Actually, in the temple era, they have singing tasks and that sort of stuff, and in the tabernacle era, anyways, they have all these different roles, specific roles in service of the high priest. So there's the regular priests, normal priests. And then there's the high priest, all right? High priest in the line of Aaron. Josephus, writing in the 1st century, he records 83 names, 83 high priests between Aaron and the high priest that was there at the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So he would say there's 83. I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but he would know more than I would at least. And so he records 83 of these guys, and their main job as the high priest is to serve God for the people. Hebrews 5:1. Hebrews 5:1, we read this. It says, "For every high priest taken from men is appointed in service to God for the people, to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins." Now, a prophet's job, like Elijah or whatever, a prophet speaks to the people from God. They hear from God and they speak to the people. The priest, and the high priest specifically, it's the opposite. His job is to speak to God on behalf of the people. The priest is a person, and he champions the people's case before God. Then the high priest is the ultimate in that job, in that role. And he does that by specifically 3 kinds of things. His main job is to make sure that God is happy with the people. His main job is to make sure that the people are forgiven by God, and that his job is to call on God to bless the people. Those 3 things, making sure God's happy. Now that's a quick summary version of quite a bit of things. To make sure that God's people are forgiven, that the forgiveness has happened, and that God's blessing the people. Now I don't want to give all this away, but Jesus, being our great high priest, what he is doing for us is he's making sure that God is happy, that there's peace between us and God, that God is completely satisfied, that we are forgiven. He's taking care of all that in his high priestly function, that we are forgiven, and calls on God and intercedes on our behalf in the throne room of God to make sure that, to call on God to bless us, to bless us. And he's our advocate. You can think of him as a throne room lawyer, advocate in heaven, who has championed your case face to face with God. So the high priest serves God on behalf of the people. Okay, so let's keep going in chapter 5 here. Verse 2, we read more about this high priest. It says, he, the high priest, is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray, since he is also subject to weakness. Because of this, he must make a sin offering for himself as well as for the people. Now, this is the human high priest. Jesus is not in the same way, and we'll see more about that in the chapters ahead here. But the high priest in the line of Aaron, he exists as one who understands weakness. That's part of his priestly role. He's able to be a great high priest because he understands weakness. Now, some of you have had a bad experience when it comes to religious people. And you've been feeling judged and condemned ungraciously by people who have who've just exuded disapproval and condemnation, and it hasn't gone well because they're people. Religious people can be punks, right? Especially if they forget that they have weaknesses as well. Maybe they're having a good day and they forgot about the day before. Whatever the case may be, they can be real punks when it comes to approaching. And the Bible Jesus talks a lot about this whole getting the plank out of your own eye and dealing with the speck in your neighbor's eye. Now, I'm not implying that it's not okay to talk to someone about their sin. We're supposed to, actually. We're supposed to spur one another on to holiness, and we can confront people and say, hey, friend, you are really not on the track of holiness here in this area. Now, maybe that's the part that agitates you, and you're like, don't judge me. No, that's legit. Actually, that's a family thing. We can do that with one another, okay? Where it gets off track is when the person is a punk, and that's not saying that what they're saying is wrong, but how they're saying it, they're not saying it as one who understands weakness. And that's where it gets really just bad tasting, right? Where the person is coming across as if they have no weaknesses of their own. Well, the high priest being human, he's supposed to be someone who is approaching God with great compassion for those who's interceding for. He has compassion because he understands, he maybe not understand every weakness, but he understands weakness, and so he can be a great high priest and intercede on behalf of people. And he can be gentle in dealing with us as one who understands. So the high priest approaches God as someone who understands. Verse 4, as we're reading along, it says, no one takes this honor on himself. I think there is a little bit of historical irony there, but it's at least it's not supposed to be that way. Instead, a person is called by God just as Aaron was. In the same way, verse 5, I'm just going to continue on. In the same way, the Messiah, Jesus, did not exalt himself to become a high priest. But the one who said to him, "You are my son, today I have become your father," also said in another passage, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During his earthly life, Jesus offered prayers and appeals with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Though he was God's son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. After he was perfected, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and he was declared by God a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now, there's lots of good things there. We could have had a whole message just in that one particular section. But as you can see there, you've got Jesus who, as being on earth, was the kind of high priest that you would want. He's one who's heard by God. Loud cries, tears, he's heard by God. It's just what you want. You want that in a priest, one who is effective in their intercession on your behalf. But what I want to look at, we've looked at there's normal priests, we've looked at there's high priests, and here we see that Jesus is part of a different priesthood, a higher priesthood still, and that being in the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek, that's the higher biblical order of priesthood. Now, where does that come from? Well, Melchizedek is mentioned in 3 different books of the Bible. Good Bible trivia there for you. The book of Hebrews, Psalm 110, and then the book of Genesis. The story basically is in Genesis chapter 14, not Moses, Abraham. Abraham is returning from defeating the kings who had invaded Sodom and Gomorrah, where the cities which are now where kind of the Dead Sea is at the moment. And Lot had lived down there. And before they were destroyed, these enemy kings had come, carried them away. Abraham got his local peoples kings to join with him and go capture them all back and defeat those kings. And anyways, as they're returning, they get near Jerusalem. And the king of Jerusalem, by title or name, very likely title, Melchizedek, comes out, and Abraham gives him the offering to God. It says he's the priest of God Most High. King of Jerusalem, priest of God Most High. And Abraham gives him a tenth of all of that he'd taken, and Melchizedek, as priest of God Most High, blesses Abraham. Now, the whole argument, well, I don't want to get into the whole argument, but yeah, okay, I'm not going to get into it. Anyways, so you've got Melchizedek. Now, if you like to take things deeper and do some just random research stuff based on things that we talk about around here, you could Google and research this phrase. Is Melchizedek Shem? Shem, son of Noah. That would just be a fun little exercise for you. Many Bible scholars are intrigued by the idea. And basically, is it possible? Yeah, well, Shem would have died according to the biblical chronology when Abraham's 140 years old. So at least, so that means Abraham's son Isaac would have been 40 years old at the time. And then that would have made him the ultimate family patriarch, spiritual patriarch and priest over the whole family. Abraham would have been a descendant of Shem. It would make sense why you would have a priest of God Most High in idol-worshiping Canaan, which is being handed to Abraham and his descendants. There's a lot of factors there. It's just a fun little study. If you want to look into it, go for it. I just want to say, though, if you do that, don't become a punk. It may be possible, may be probable, but it's definitely not certain. So don't be dogmatic about anything that's not definite. Okay, that's just kind of words to live by when it comes to just general fun Bible study. Anyways, you can look into it and you can think about it. But the point that Hebrews chapter 7 is going to make, which is all about Melchizedek and this priesthood, Jesus being in the priesthood of Melchizedek, basically what it's saying is that there is a higher priesthood than Aaron, a higher priesthood than the Levites and Aaron, and that Jesus has to be part of this higher priesthood for two reasons. One, because he's not a Levite. It's clear he's not in that tribe. He's part of the tribe of Judah. And secondly, because his priesthood is superior in nature than even what's going on at the temple with the high priest and all that sort of stuff. So he's got a few verses from Hebrews chapter 7, just kind of highlighting this. I might look at Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11. It says, if then perfection came through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there for another priest to appear, said to be in the order of Melchizedek, and not in the order of Aaron? Okay, so there's a need of, let's skip down to verse 15. And this becomes clearer if another priest like Melchizedek appears, who did not become a priest based on a legal command concerning physical descent, but based on the power of an indestructible life. Which I just love that phrase. He became priest based on the power of an indestructible life. Okay, so you've got these three priesthood levels, Melchizedek. Now, Jesus, the point we're not making is that Jesus is part of this superior priesthood, but actually the ultimate point is Jesus is superior to the superior priesthood. He's superior to the Levites. He's superior to Aaron and the high priest of Aaron. He's part of the Melchizedekian priesthood, but he's superior even to that. How is he superior? Well, let's look at verse 23. In verse 23 of Hebrews chapter 7, it says, now many have become Levitical priests since they are prevented by death from remaining in office. But because he, Jesus, remains forever, he holds his priesthood permanently. Therefore, he is always able to save those who come to God through him, since he always lives to intercede for him. These are ways that he's superior to even Melchizedek even. For this is the kind of high priest we need. Holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, exalted above the heavens. He doesn't need to offer sacrifices every day as high priests do, first for their own sin and then for those of the people. He did this once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints a high priest, as high priest, men who are weak, but the promise of the oath, which came after the law, appoints a son who has been perfected forever. Now, the main point of what is being said is this, which it's always helpful when you come across a sentence like that in the Bible, especially after a confusing chapter, maybe pertaining to deep and weightier things. Now, the main point of what was being said is this. I guess I'll just throw in, he's already established early in the chapters that he'd like to talk about deep things, but you're not able to understand them. So he's helpful here. Anyway, he or she, the author, whatever the author is. Now, the main point of what's being said is this: we have this kind of high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and the true tabernacle. And this is the main, biggest point. That was set up by the Lord and not by man. That the superiority of Jesus as high priest is he is in the heavens. He is in the throne room of God. Again, I want to underline some of these things that are in this section, just highlighting the superiority of Jesus. He remains forever. He's priesthood permanently, always able to save, always lives to intercede. These are all, but how much more amazing is he's holy. He is innocent. He is undefiled, separated from sinners, exalted. There's so many different ways that he's part of this minister of a sanctuary, the true sanctuary in heaven, the superiority of Jesus as our great high priest. Friends, you need an advocate in the throne room of God. If you're not a Christian, if you've never given your life to Jesus, you need Jesus to be your advocate in heaven. But if you know Jesus, you also definitely need, and you are greatly underestimating how much you need, an advocate, a high priest, face to face. I'm just spitting it out there. An advocate, a high priest in the throne room of God who can champion your case face to face. Remember, the author of Hebrews is wanting us to zoom in on some of the glorious aspects of our salvation, and one of that is this. Why is it so amazing? Well, let me tell you this story. About a year ago, Kelly was out of town. She was at a wedding. She was away in Seattle for a week, and I was at home here because I was here with you all. And during that week, I was battling with anxiety. I was having a really vicious battle with anxiety, and it was just upsetting. I don't know if I heard me talk about my panic and anxiety issues in the past. Well, how do you pray when you're overwhelmed with fear and anxiety and panic? How do you pray in those weeks when you're just overwhelmed and you're feeling sleepless and you're feeling nauseous all the time? And well, I was going through that. And when my wife was away, and what I was doing is I was going to war in prayer. And when I go to war in prayer, sometimes I feel like a prayer barbarian. And I mean that in the kindest sense of the term because I'm talking about myself. And what is a prayer barbarian? Well, sometimes I don't know exactly how to pray. Sometimes I don't even know what the real issue that needs to be done addressed is. So for instance, with anxiety, do I need to deal with the fact that I have a family history of anxiety? That I have a biological predisposition towards fear and anxiety? It runs in the family line. Do I need to deal with that? I've also reinforced this general predisposition by having trigger events take place while I'm alone. And so I've developed a psychosomatic reinforcement that triggers fear and anxiety in similar kinds of contexts, okay? So is this mental? Or how do I pray about this? Mental, dealing with healing over this psychosomatic thing that maybe I've reinforced over the years. Is it biological? Am I praying for biological healing? Is it spiritual? Is it spiritual? Is the enemy coming after me while I'm susceptible? Is it demonic? Do I need to be dealing with a demonic attack, spirit of fear and spirit of anxiety and spirit of panic, all that, just the cocktail of different kinds of spirits that would deal with the fear? What is it? How do you pray about this? Well, I probably have all those aspects that I need to pray about. all those things to deal with. Well, as a prayer barbarian, what I mean is I don't just have one thing, I just need to target this in prayer. I just take this warhammer thing called prayer, and I just swing it wildly until it shatters things. And I just pray aggressively about, breaking off this family stuff and praying healing over biological disposition. I pray over my mind, renewing of my mind and healing over my mind. And it's the reinforced psychosomatic realities. I don't know. I just pray in every way that I can think of. I pray peace over my being. I pray, nausea or sleeplessness. I'll pray about those. Those are very symptomatic. So I don't spend a lot of time praying over the symptoms. I'm trying to get at the heart of it, but I'm just swinging this prayer hammer, trying to hit anything I can think of, and I start going after the demonic, and I'm saying, spirit of fear, you be gone in the name of Jesus, and I'm going after this for days, right? Because my wife's out of town for days, and I'm battling it day after day after day. So after about a couple days, this idea enters my mind. What if I appeal to God? What if I appeal to Jesus as my high priest? What if I cry out to Jesus as my high priest to plead on my behalf, face to face, in the throne room of God for being rescued, for being healed, for being saved? What if I asked Jesus to champion my case in heaven? And I guess what I'm thinking is I'm thinking of the book of Job. And I'm seeing how in the beginning of the book of Job, you've got this heaven throne room thing, and Satan comes up, and Satan gets permission to torment Job. God gives him permission. He puts limits, but he gives him permission. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know. Maybe that's happened to me. Maybe there's been some permission granted there. So I'm like, Jesus, I want you to appeal to my Father who is in heaven to issue a decree that the torment ends. I want a divine decree in heaven to take place on my behalf. So Jesus, my high priest, champion this case and appeal to the Father to issue a decree that this anxiety, that this fear, that this panic is over, that it's shattered, that it's done. I don't know, you ever think about praying that way? I was reading in Mark this week for my Bible read-through. Mark 9:29, I believe it's 9:29. And the story was going on that Jesus, he's already given his disciples authority to cast out demons. He's given them that authority. He goes up on the mountain, he comes back down. There is a situation there where there's a demon-possessed child, and the disciples are not able to cast out this demon. And so Jesus does. And then they come up to him afterwards, and they're like, okay, so what's the deal? We've been given authority here. We've had lots of experience doing this. And Jesus says these words. He says, this kind, whatever that means, this type of demon or this kind of situation maybe, this kind can only come out through prayer or through prayer and fasting, depending on your translation. But this kind, there is a situation or a kind, and it just got me thinking. It got me thinking about Job. It got me thinking about appealing to God as high priest. Maybe there is a kind of torment that this child was going through that can only be healed not through certain amounts of the authority, whatever the authorities was, but by a divine decree in heaven maybe, saying that torment is over. No more torment is allowed. It just got me thinking about that and what that situation is. I'm not saying that that's the right way to understand that passage. I haven't given it a ton of thought. But I do believe that there really is something to having your high priest, Jesus of Nazareth, appeal on your behalf about things so that divine decrees are taken. Either divine limitations are placed against the enemy or divine freedom has been mandated from the throne room of God. If you have been praying about something in your life and not seeing breakthrough like you were hoping for, like me, in this area of anxiety, maybe you can think about appealing to Jesus as high priest and him championing and seeking a divine decree in heaven. It's just something to think about. But what are the implications for you? What are the implications for you having a strategically placed high priest? Where it's no longer just up to your prayers. Where you have a Jesus, a high priest who prays, who champions on your behalf, face to face with God in heaven. That's powerful. That's powerful stuff. Do you need grace? You have a high priest who loves to champion that in the throne room of God. Do you need help? Do you need extra from God? Do you need more from God these days? You have a high priest in heaven who champions that sort of stuff and who can call on God on your behalf. Do you feel like God's not listening to you anymore? There might be lies there, but you also have always access to Jesus, who can take your prayer request to God on your behalf in the throne room, face to face with God Almighty. Do you need favor and blessing? You've got an advocate, a high priest. We're supposed to go through this section about how Jesus is the greatest of the greatest high priests, and we're supposed to think, this is amazing. I was happy if I was just forgiven for all my sins. I was happy just to know that I was saved and rescued out of the dominion of darkness. But now I have got a champion and an advocate in the real, true throne room of God, who is face to face with the Father. I'm kind of running out of energy. So I'm excited about this. It's pretty amazing. And that's what the author of Hebrews is trying to get us to see. All the ways that Jesus is so spectacular. That he's so amazing, that it's so wonderful to throw your life and to join your life into his, and to align yourself to Jesus' way. To approach God not just in his name, but also through him. It's pretty amazing. I hope that gets you excited. There's one more aspect, though, that I want to make sure we highlight. It's spectacular to have a high priest, but there's more. You who have given your life to Jesus have now become the priesthood of heaven. You have become priests in service to, with, the high priest, the great high priest, Jesus. Just as the Levitical priests were in service to the high priest in the line of Aaron, we are now the priesthood of heaven, the priesthood of Jesus, who serve Jesus, and we serve with Jesus as priests. That means that on earth we do priestly stuff. This is what Peter writes about this topic. This stuff is all over the Bible. Peter writes about this in 1 Peter chapter 2. He says, you yourselves as living stones are being built into a spiritual house for a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices. That's what this heavenly priesthood does here. Spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Skipping down to verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's possession, so that you may proclaim the praises or proclaim the excellencies of the one who has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Friends, either this is who you are, either you are part of this priesthood of heaven, or I am inviting you to join with me and be a part of this priesthood of heaven. To be a priest of God Most High, under Jesus, our great high priest. It is the most meaning-filled and significant way to live. To be about this priestly work in whatever your job, whatever your occupation, whatever your course of study, whatever context you find yourself in, to be living in that context as a priest, and to be carrying out priestly function. Not just I have the title of priest, but I am carrying out a divine holy priesthood function in my context. What is that? Well, the first part of the priestly function is we offer spiritual sacrifices to God. What is that? We quote Romans chapter 12 every week. Therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. The first priesthood aspect to your role is to live holy, is to live pleasing to God in whatever your context. To say no to sin, to not live like everyone else, to not date like everyone else, to not do business like everyone else, to not seek promotion like everyone else, to not seek your own priorities and like everyone else. To live different, to live pleasing and holy to God, to live in such a way when God looks at your life, He smiles. Part of your priesthood work is to live holy, set apart, different, pleasing to God. To live in the highest levels of holiness. Back to 1 Peter verses, what else do we see that as priests of Jesus that we do? Well, number 2, we proclaim God's praises. We proclaim the praises of the one who's called us out of darkness and into His marvelous light. It's not just living holy, but also being bold in proclaiming boldly, I guess you could say. The church that the Hebrews were a part of, that the target of this book, they had lost their boldness. They'd stopped proclaiming the praises or proclaiming the excellencies of Jesus. They'd become much more quiet about how amazing Jesus is. They'd become much more quiet about how amazing it is to be rescued out of darkness. And how wonderful it is to have a personal advocate in the throne room of God, appealing for grace. They'd lost that. The author here is trying to reawaken that. Jesus does that, and we as Jesus' priests on earth, we get to tell people that not only can they be forgiven, but they can have an advocate in the throne room of God, face to face with the Father, appealing on their behalf. That if they give their lives to Jesus, they can have that. We get to proclaim how great Jesus is in all His different ways. And that's one of the things we do in our context. We talk about how great Jesus is. Thirdly, we speak to God on behalf of others. That's what priests do. We go to God on behalf of people. Prayer. When we do prayer ministry, that is priest ministry. Where on behalf of someone else, we're saying, Father, look at this situation and intervene. Prayer, when you're by yourself or when you're with a group of people and you're praying for other people, that is priestly ministry. When you're sitting there with the people in your life and they're hurting and they're suffering and maybe they don't know Jesus, and you ask them, "Can I pray for you?" It is glorious. Please do this. This is wonderful. And most people don't say no. And if they do, then you're like, nah, it sucks to be you. No, I don't think you can say that. But you're offering to bring them before the throne room of God as a priest. That's what you're doing. And you're like, Jesus, pay attention to this situation. Jesus pays attention when you carry out your priestly function, even if they don't know Jesus. That's part of that function. Anyways, we speak to God on behalf of another. And that's just the way we get to live the meaning-filled life. We get to pray for people, bring their requests before God. We get to live holy and blameless. We get to talk about how great Jesus is. That's the significant life. That's living our priesthood. Once we were not a people, but now we are God's people. Once we'd not received mercy, now we have received mercy. If you have not received mercy, if you've not given your life to Jesus, I encourage you. Jesus is spectacular. Salvation is more than you even dare to believe. It's glorious, I encourage you to give your life to Jesus and be saved. I encourage you to give your life to Jesus, be forgiven. I encourage you to give your life to Jesus and be part of this priesthood, be part of this mission to be about Jesus' kingdom and his work in our generation. I've got 3 challenges for us today. Challenge number 1, spiritual sacrifices. What is one more step, one more spiritual sacrifice that you can make as you take another step towards personal, practical holiness? And take it. Take it. Keep taking it. Keep taking them. You're like, I don't know if I can take the one that I feel like I really need to take. You can. You can. Just go for it. Go for it. Go for it. And number 2, proclaiming praises 3 times a week. 3 times this week. 3 times this week. Are you hearing me? 3 times this week. I want you to boast about how amazing Jesus is. You can do this. You can do this 3 times. Boast about how amazing Jesus is. Maybe because he's your advocate in heaven. Maybe it's just about the stuff you heard today. Maybe it's that he's so gracious. Maybe it's because he loves you. Whatever the case, boast 3 times this week about how amazing Jesus is. That's what the author of Hebrews is trying to cultivate in these people.
Hello, and thank you for watching our service here at Rehope. My name's Adam, and I'm on the pastoral care team. So, every Sunday, we invite people in the congregation to come up and receive some prayer ministry, and we want to actually extend that offer out to you guys who are watching. So, if you ever want to come and receive prayer ministry from us, just send us an email. If you get in touch with Hannah, who is our pastoral admin, her email address is hannah@rehope.co.uk. Okay, thank you very much, and God bless.